Adil once stood at the top, a respected businessman, a loving husband, a father. But greed had whispered in his ear, promising more. He listened, and in the end, he lost everything. Now, he walked the cold streets, a shadow of the man he once was. The once proud owner of a company now begged for spare change outside the very buildings he used to own. His fine suits had been replaced with tattered clothes, his confident stride now a weary shuffle. People who once greeted him with respect now turned away, pretending not to see him. He had been powerful, now he was invisible. The city, which had once felt like his empire, had become a prison where every corner reminded him of his failure. It hadn't happened overnight. The descent was slow, almost unnoticeable at first. A few shortcuts in business, some ignored warnings, a deal that promised high returns but required bending the law. Each step seemed justifiable, until the walls came crashing down. The scandal broke, and with it, his empire crumbled. Investors pulled out, lawsuits flooded in, and his name became a headline for all the wrong reasons. His wife, Sanaa, had begged him to stop before it was too late. His son, Rayhan, had looked at him with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. But Adil had been too consumed by his hunger for success to listen. And then it was too late. The house was sold to cover debts. His family left, seeking a life untainted by his disgrace. Former friends disappeared, unwilling to associate with a man whose name had become synonymous with corruption. The world he had built, brick by brick, collapsed around him. One night, exhausted and starving, he sat on a deserted sidewalk, staring at the city lights in the distance. They flickered, bright and untouchable, just like his past. His stomach ached, but the pain inside him ran deeper than hunger. A group of young men passed by, laughing. One of them recognized him. "Hey, isn't that Adil? The guy who lost everything." Another chuckled, tossing a coin at his feet. "Buy yourself some dignity." Adil didn't move. The coin rolled away, lost in the cracks of the pavement, just like him. For the first time in his life, he had no plan, no idea how to fix what was broken, no one left to turn to. He leaned back against the cold wall and closed his eyes, wondering if this was all that remained of his story. As sleep crept in, one thought echoed in his mind. Is there any way back from this? Adil woke to the smell of food, warm, simple, and inviting. His eyes fluttered open to find himself in a small, dimly lit room. A frail but kind-looking old man sat nearby, stirring a pot over a makeshift stove. "You're awake," the man said without looking up. "You were half frozen when I found you." Adil tried to sit up, his body aching from nights spent on the streets. "Where am I?" "A shelter of sorts," the old man replied, handing him a bowl of lentil soup. "Eat." Adil hesitated, but hunger overpowered his pride. He took a spoonful, the warmth spreading through his empty stomach. The man introduced himself as Rahim. "I don't have much, but I share what I can," he said. Adil studied him. There was something different about Rahim, something he couldn't quite place. He had nothing, yet he carried himself with quiet dignity, as if his circumstances didn't define him. Days passed, and Adil observed Rahim's routine. Every morning, he collected scraps from local markets, cooked simple meals, and distributed them to the homeless. Unlike Adil, who had spent his life chasing wealth, Rahim found purpose in helping others. One evening, Adil watched as Rahim handed his last piece of bread to a hungry child. The boy's eyes lit up with gratitude, a look Adil hadn't seen in a long time. A sharp pang of guilt gripped his chest. He had spent years chasing success, yet this man, who owned nothing, had something far more valuable. "You don't ask for anything in return?" Adil finally asked. Rahim smiled. "What good is kindness if it comes with a price?" Adil had no answer. He had built his entire life around transactions, giving only when there was something to gain. Perhaps that was why he had fallen so far. One night, as they sat outside the shelter, Adil spoke for the first time about his past. Rahim listened without judgment. "I had everything," Adil admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I ruined it with my own hands. Rahim stirred the fire with a stick, then build again. Adil let out a bitter laugh. It's not that simple. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Rahim said. But you still have a choice. Adil wanted to argue, but deep inside, he knew Rahim was right. He had spent too long drowning in regret, waiting for redemption to find him. But maybe redemption wasn't something given, it was something earned. For the first time in years, Adil felt something stir inside him. Hope. Adil woke before dawn, a habit he had long abandoned in his old life. Rahim was already up, preparing food for the shelter. Without a word, Adil stepped forward and started helping. It felt unnatural at first. His hands, once used to signing contracts, now washed vegetables and stirred soup. But as days passed, the work became familiar, even comforting. Rahim never praised him, never offered words of encouragement. He didn't need to. Adil felt the shift within himself. Each meal served, each small act of kindness, chipped away at the man he used to be. One morning, Rahim handed him a small bundle of money. A friend runs a mechanic shop nearby. He needs help. You should go. Adil hesitated. The thought of working an ordinary job unsettled him. But then he remembered the cold streets, the hunger, the humiliation. He nodded. The shop was small and cluttered, run by a gruff man named Rafiq. You know anything about cars? He asked, eyeing Adil's worn-out clothes. No, Adil admitted. Rafiq scoffed. Then you learn. The first few days were painful. His body ached, his hands blistered, and he made countless mistakes. But he kept going. There was something honest about the work, something real. For the first time, his efforts brought immediate results. A repaired engine, a fixed tire, a car that roared back to life. It was a far cry from the world he once ruled, but it was his. With his first wages, he bought fresh clothes. Nothing expensive, just enough to look presentable. He stared at his reflection in a shop window. The man looking back was different, older, humbled, but not defeated. One evening, he sat outside the shelter, staring at his phone. He had saved enough to send a small amount to Sanaa and Rayhan. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He typed a message, hesitated, then sent it. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know I'm trying. Days passed without a response. He didn't blame them. Trust wasn't built overnight. One afternoon, while walking back from the shop, he saw a young boy collapse on the street. Without thinking, he rushed over, lifting the unconscious child into his arms. A woman nearby called for an ambulance. Later that night, Rahim handed him an old newspaper. They wrote about you, he said with a rare smile. Adil frowned. The article was short, just a small piece about a former businessman who had fallen from grace, but saved a child. Nothing grand, but enough to make people notice. He set the paper down, heart pounding. Maybe, just maybe, his past didn't have to define his future. Adil sat outside the shelter, staring at his phone. Still no response. He told himself he wasn't expecting one, but the weight in his chest said otherwise. He had spent so long trying to fix what was broken, but some things took more time than effort alone could mend. Rahim sat beside him, sipping tea. You've done your part. The rest is up to them. Adil nodded, but didn't answer. A week later, while working at the shop, he heard someone call his name. He turned, heart pounding. Sanaa and Rayhan stood there. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Rayhan had grown taller, his features sharper. But his eyes, the same ones that once held disappointment, now held uncertainty. Sanaa spoke first. I read about you. Adil wiped his hands on his shirt, suddenly self-conscious. I didn't expect you to come. She hesitated. I didn't expect you to change. Rayhan stepped forward, shifting awkwardly. Is it true? You saved that kid. Adil nodded. I just did what anyone would do. Silence stretched between them. Then, softly, Rayhan said, I don't remember the last time you did something for someone else. Adil swallowed the lump in his throat. I don't either. Sanaa sighed, glancing at the shop. You work here now? He nodded. It's not much, but it's mine. She studied him carefully, as if searching for the man she once knew. And the shelter? It gave me a second chance. Another silence. Then Rayhan, hesitant but sincere, asked, "Can we see it?" The walk back felt surreal. Adil had imagined this moment countless times, but never like this. Quiet, uncertain, fragile. At the shelter, Rahim greeted them with his usual nod. Adil led them inside, showing them where he had slept, where he had learned to cook, where he had started over. Sanaa touched the rough wooden table. "I never thought you'd end up somewhere like this." "Neither did I," Adil admitted. "But I'm glad I did." Rayhan looked around. "So, what now?" Adil met his son's gaze. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out if you'll let me." The boy hesitated, then nodded. It wasn't a promise, but it was a beginning. That night, for the first time in years, Adil sat with his family and shared a meal. The past still lingered, but for once, it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a lesson. And for the first time, Adil wasn't running from it. He was ready to move forward.